Hi, rock and roll community. It's Barb. It's Tuesday, which means it is our Tuesday Training Tools Day. I hope everyone's having a great week as always. And here we are in the month of April, week number 2. This month, our theme, we're talking about lesson presentations and all these wonderful materials that we have in our classroom and learning a little more about how to engage with them, how to set them up, have some tips around how we can be enticing our learners to want to work with these lovely lessons, and how we become the link from the child to the environment, and make it just a really meaningful learning experience for the children. So last week we talked about our forecasting lists and what do we want to think about before we even bring that material into our classrooms. And maybe trying to really figure out and forecast, well, if there's a big spill, I'm going to have some extra towels, or I noticed these learning tendencies with children, so I'm going to be ready if, in case something doesn't go quite as planned, right? So really important to be reflecting on those forecasting questions so we can be really mentally prepared to bring a new lesson into the classroom, and so we can be present with the class, with the lesson when it's in our classroom. So this week we're going to talk about the material setup itself. So still a little bit on the prep side of things. We now have the materials. We thought about those forecasting lists. Now we're going to get the materials ready to bring into our classroom. And we're going to really talk about how we're setting it up in a way that's going to promote independence. And again, just really enticing that child and saying, hey, come work with this lesson. It's really fun. And it's all in the small details of how we either put a work on a tray, how we break down a work that maybe you bought from the store and make it more appropriate for our classrooms, that is more in alignment with our philosophy. And then how we're going to be bringing that into the classroom. So first, I want to start with our material making checklist, because I love this checklist. It's not to add another, here, let me pull it up so you can see it in case this is something newer to you, or maybe you've forgotten about it, because I know with COVID it's been really busy. But essentially it's just a checklist that you look over to see, okay, I want to create a new work, but let's make sure we're following, we're completing the following. And there's a list of things that you're going to check. And what's so great about this is that it's not really used to say, okay, you have to do it this way. But this is for so the child can appropriately engage with the material on their own. And it's in these small details that if we're paying attention to these, that there's more of a likelihood that the child will be more successful with the lessons in your classroom, which means they're going to engage with those lessons, and that is the ultimate goal. Like we've always said, children love a challenge. So if they're not finding a challenge in their learning materials or the lessons throughout the day, there's a good chance they're going to find a challenge, maybe through a behavior or some other classroom management issue that might come up because they're not engaged with the works in the classroom, or the learning materials in the classroom. They'll engage in a different way. But what this list ultimately lets you do is really choose any learning material. So if you're shopping somewhere at Home Goods, or if you want to do a DIY, or you're on Instagram and you see a lesson that someone, or some type of material that someone did, or on Pinterest, and you're like, oh yes, I want to bring that to the classroom. This list gives you the freedom to do that. And that's what we want you all to have as educators when you're coming up with your curriculums and your lessons, is that freedom, is that creativity. However, we want to make sure it follows this list, like I said earlier, so it is in alignment with our philosophy and what we are expecting in our classrooms. So I will attach this list to the Tuesday training tool so you can look it over. Most likely it's in your curriculum binders. If not, you can certainly print out a copy as an extra reminder. And this will again just allow you to really focus and make sure that you're paying attention to those details. And it may sound silly, like, Barb, why are we really caring if, the size of the basket that we're putting the puzzle pieces in on top of the puzzle? But those little details really, really do matter. And I want you to be paying attention to them, and making sure that, that they are, that they're happening in your classroom when you're bringing in those lessons. So, and I guess I like to use this analogy because I always think of it when I when I buy a salad. Okay, like I buy that like $17 salad that's so delicious, and I love that salad, right? And I love it because it's the perfect proportion of like the vegetables and the lettuce, and the dressing comes in like a little side thing that I get to pour on and eat perfectly, because it's set up in a way that looks delicious, as opposed to if I had a plate that had a bag of lettuce, whole carrots, a whole cucumber, a bottle of the dressing, peppers that weren't cut up. Like, I'm not going to bite into a pepper. I'm not going to just like eat like a whole thing of lettuce. But when it's presented in a way that I can use a fork and eat it, I am going to lean towards that wonderful prepared salad to eat, as opposed to the plate of all the vegetables that are not prepped. And think of it that way when you are getting your materials ready to put on your shelves, making sure everything fits on a tray, making sure, if you look down that list, that one of the first things is that it's self-contained. That means that all the pieces either live in a basket or a tray that the child can just pull out one swoop and bring it to the table or work area, for them to engage in that lesson. So it's not, they're trying to carry a bunch of pieces and it's really disorganized for them. We organize it for them so they can be more independent and more successful with it. And thinking about, how we're presenting these materials. I always use the puzzle as another example. If a puzzle's on the shelf and the pieces are already in it, it looks like it's complete. So it's really not all that inviting to a child. But if you do the simple act of just taking the puzzle pieces out, putting them in an appropriate size basket and placing them on top of the puzzle board, they can take that out. Then that's something they have to do and, kind of figure out. But but because we deconstructed it, they're looking at it, oh, I have to reconstruct that. And that's a little more engaging, than looking at a puzzle that maybe looks complete and not all that exciting. And if we're thinking of non-COVID times, which I know is hard to do, and sometimes I'm trying to be mindful about our Tuesday training tools in terms of being in this pandemic. But I think it can also be applied to the individual shelves we have right now. But I always want your mind to be thinking towards the future. And I do believe there will be one day where COVID will not be affecting our classroom setups as much as they are now. And when they're not, I want you to be prepared. So essentially, I want you to also think of not only just the material set up on that specific tray, in that specific basket, but also being creative of how then that's tying into the environment. Sometimes when a child walks into a classroom, it's really helpful if there are like one or two of those learning materials or works already pulled out and almost on display, on a table, and again kind of deconstructed so they have to do something with it. Or if there's a small activity like watercolors or a coloring activity where they can just walk up and engage. That morning time, it can be a little intimidating when you walk into a classroom and there's works on the shelves and they're still developing their understanding of how the classroom functions. And sometimes when you kind of like pull out those, or even if it's in the individual shelf, take one of the works out and have it kind of set up. That can be really helpful for some learners to then kind of get the ball rolling of, okay, I engaged in this, and now like I'm feeling more comfortable, and they're able to just kind of transition into their school day with a little more ease. Especially with the toddlers, if you leave a couple of things out, because it's a big expectation for to say, okay, you're in class, now go choose a work. Some kids don't know where to start. They don't know how to orient themselves and get there. So we can always know that that's an option, to have maybe a couple things set up and just make it look inviting. Again, if you're going shopping, I know I use this analogy a lot when we talk about prepared environment, but if you're going shopping and you may be inspired by something you see in the mannequin because you're like, oh, I love that sweater or I love those pants, but maybe you wouldn't have walked up to that table if you didn't see it already out. So same kind of like idea when we're setting up these materials because we just want the children to be excited about them, and the way we're putting them together and how neat and orderly they are is really going to help that, and in turn help you as the educator, the guide, throughout your work morning, because you won't be doing so much directing because they are able to kind of take on this cycle themselves of, yes, I'm excited to do these works. So again, I know it looks a little different for COVID times, but even in the individual shelves, the way that we're setting up these materials up on the trays is still, still true in terms of how what the expectations are for COVID. So take a look around your classroom, look over the material making checklist. Not all of everything on that checklist will always apply, but for the most part it will, and you'll know which ones do and don't based on your division, whether you're infant, toddler, or preschool. But look it over and just make sure that everything's following it, and then pay attention to those details, and then continue to observe. If you made a small little change, you may be surprised what a big difference that made with how the child engaged in that particular work. So pay attention to the details, have fun getting things a little more reorganized, looking for that perfect basket to organize things within the tray. And if you need any help or ideas, I know some of you have been asking amazing questions about, I need more practical life ideas for COVID. We have some materials that we used to use, but I can't use them now. So certainly reach out, and we can continue to brainstorm during this time. Like I said, that's the magic of that checklist, is that no matter if we're in a global pandemic and we can't use certain materials, or if you find something you like, we can apply that checklist to anything and make the material that you have at hand appropriate for our classroom. So it's giving you freedom and creativity, and that's what we want for you. We want you to be able to have that alive in your learning environments. Okay, so if you have any questions, reach out. If not, we will continue our discussion next week about lesson presentations and the material in our classroom. I hope everyone has a fantastic day, and I will see you next week. Bye, everyone.